our topic is climate change and human behavior, a Vedic and Vedantic perspective. And as we robustly explored yesterday, the topic is interesting. Like, we need big challenges in life, and this is certainly one of them to think about and to take action on. For many years, it's been known that damage to the environment has accelerated, and it's accelerated mostly within the last 100, 120 years, and certainly within the span of our lifetimes. And the opportunity to potentially reverse those effects is within our grasp, we hope, but it also depends upon some framework for action. And we do know that our collective resolve and human cooperation has been limited or frustratingly stymied so far, perhaps by the fact that governments, by their nature, are imperfect responders and have varying degrees of freedom from influence, from private agenda. So when we look at the spiritual community and its opportunity to provide a framework of cooperation and a way that we can reach within ourselves to be universalized in our approach to these problems, it then becomes a repository of strength and of understanding for us to actually take positive action, both collectively and individually. Yesterday we robustly explored this, and overnight I was prompted to review the writings of Henry David Thoreau, in particular Walden, from 1854. The American Transcendentalist writer, for reasons he didn't fully disclose, went on a retreat of his own. And, of course, the landscape where he went was part of a landscape at that time that was more agrarian. And when this society was founded in 1900, this is the Vedanta Society of Northern California, the countryside was within our grasp and experience, and the urbanization of the way that most people lived was very different. Perhaps 90% of people in this country, the United States, lived on or close to farms, and that is definitely not true at this time. So most spiritual traditions are very adamant about the love of nature, and certainly the indigenous populations around the world, and we can study that even on the land from which we speak, indigenous peoples were very connected with nature and had reverence for it. So what Thoreau had to say, back even before that in 1854, was as follows: it's the beauty within us that makes it possible for us to recognize the beauty around us. And it occurs to me that under the influence of Ralph Waldo Emerson, whose land he went to on his cabin, his experiment was to go inside as a transcendentalist, to come to some authenticity and empowerment about what to do about the desire for greater meaning in life. His feeling was that the way society was organized was somewhat opposed to that authenticity. So he was a critic of that. And by so doing, he reviewed his reactions with great focus, and he didn't explain, he showed restraint in that. He didn't actually hit us over the head with descriptions of why that was important and what we were supposed to understand about it. He was saying that that was his way of not just hugging a tree, but of becoming the spirit of the tree in a non-dualistic way. So with that introduction, I would like to introduce, and it's a great honor to do so, our Swami in charge at the Vedanta Society in San Francisco, a great world scholar of breadth and wise experience, a monk of the Ramakrishna order, our esteemed Swami, and pranams to you, Swami, Swami Tattwamayananda ji.
Thank you, Bobby, for that very wonderful introduction. And now I shall begin with a chant. And if you really understand, when I explain the meaning, you will understand. Maybe Thoreau would have joined with all of us in reciting this verse, which I'm going to recite just now. Om Madhuvata Rutayadhi Madhuksharandi Sindhavaha Mathvi Irnasantoshadhihi Madhunakta Mutoshasi Madhumatparthivagam Rajaha Madhudyaurastuna Pita Madhumanno Vanaspadir Madhumagam Astu Suryaha Madhvir Gavo Bhavantunaha. Sweet blow the winds, the streams scatter sweetness, may the herbs and trees and plants bring us sweetness, the nights and dawns fill us with sweetness. The dust of the earth is full of sweetness and pristine purity. May heaven itself like a father bring us sweetness, the ancient forest trees are full of purity and sweetness. May the sun itself shower sweetness on all of us. May sweetness flow towards us in all directions and from all directions. Now here you find, actually this is a verse from Yajurveda, and you find in a different way, you also find in Rigveda. It just speaks about the sweetness and purity of nature. As Bobby mentioned, in the words of Henry Thoreau, when we have beauty within our hearts, we will be able to connect with beauty in nature. And we will be seeing beyond the external form or names and forms of trees and mountains. You will be connecting with something that goes deeper than what we see. It is not the beauty or the grandeur that the English King George III lamented. He went mad, it is said, because the loss of 13 colonies was a terrible loss to him, he could not bear, and as a result, George III went mad because they lost the British colonies. He was not talking about the beauty of the meadows and mountains and valleys. He was lamenting the loss of these colonies that he wanted to exploit and eat and enjoy. That's not the beauty. Here, Thoreau, as the ancient rishis, ancient Vedic sages did, he was connecting with the beauty and charm and grandeur and the transcendence of what he saw around him, the ponds, the waters, the rivers, the forests, the trees, the clouds, and the sky, and so on. Now, I mentioned waters here. In fact, there is a very interesting and very famous hymn in the Rigveda Samhita. It is devoted to water. Water conceived to be a deity. Now, one may be surprised when you talk about conceiving water as a deity, looking upon waters as something transcendental, something divine. Now, let us discuss the present problems today. Everyone is aware of this challenge of climate change. But we all should know that the real problem is us, we ourselves. Climate is not the problem. The air and waters are not the problem. We are the problem. So how to solve the problem? We have to change the way we look at climate. We have to change the way we look at the nature around us. We have to raise our own consciousness, our own understanding of what we are. Which means we have to go beyond the utilitarian concept. Even many of the solutions that we are putting forward to solve this crisis of climate change are based on crude utilitarian approach. Because the climate change or the global warming will cause loss of lives and property, so we must solve the problem. So there again, it is the commercial approach that we find so strongly emphasized here. Because there is a problem, it will affect our health, so we won't be able to live comfortably, so we have to solve the problem. But the ancient Vedic sages, long before any of the present problems emerged, maybe 6,000 years before, they solved this problem by changing the way we look at nature. Nature is looked upon as a participant in our own life. So, nature is not there for us to exploit, enjoy and make use of, but nature is non-different, non-distinct from ourselves. Nature is part of our own spiritual family. So, in this interesting verse, it's a very, very well-known suktam. You know, I think I can do justice to the subject only by quoting, reciting, referring to the ancient Vedic words, the mantras, as much as possible. Because hundreds of lectures are going on all over the world in so many platforms discussing the problem of climate change as if it is a problem coming from outside. But really it is a problem that comes from within ourselves. So we have to look at nature, including waters, and we will discuss also how the ancient sages used to address a tree, a mountain, a plant, and how they looked upon this important function of agriculture, which is actually a way of interacting with Mother Earth. So this particular verse comes from in the Rigveda Samhita. Those of you who don't have maybe acquaintance with Sanskrit language, Vedic Sanskrit is very, very ancient. It is totally different from the modern grammatical Sanskrit. So there are many translations available. It is in the Rigveda Samhita, 10th mandala, which means 10th section, and it is 8th sukta, rather 9th sukta. It is 9th sukta. It begins like this: Apo hishta mayo bhuva stha na urje dadadhana maheranaya chakshasi. What it says is, O waters, let you be givers of peace and enjoyment to the whole creation. And in another connected work, there is a statement which shows how the ancient Vedic sages looked upon water, whether it is water that is flowing in a river. It's called, samudrartha means rivers or streams flowing towards ocean. It's called samudrartha. Sometimes saranti means waters in the spring, waters in a well. Whatever may be the manifestation of this water which gives us life, which sustains our life, It is a na apsu mutra purisham kuryat na nishtived nava vivasana snayad. What it means is, you should not pollute water by putting human waste, by urination, by cleaning your clothes or your body, nasnayad. We should not pollute water, dilute water. Water is something sacred. Because here, water is not something that quenches our thirst. Water is conceived to be a divine gift from Mother Earth that helps us to sustain our life. That's why the first prayer itself, He apa hi yuyam maya bhuvasthaha. What it means is, Yasmat karana sukhasya bhavaitre bhavadal. Let thou be the givers of prosperity, sustenance and life to the whole creation. Not only that, going beyond that, the Vedas say, just like the essence of water is like the milk that comes from mother. A baby who is affectionately brought up by mother, drinking mother's own milk, like that the Mother Earth is bringing up its children with these waters. So, Yova Shivatamu Rasa. So, rasa actually means the essence. So, let this water, the sacred water, be like affectionate mother's milk that sustains children. And then there are many interesting verses. Sanno Devi Rabishtaye Apo Bhavantu Pitaye Samyo Rabisravantu Naha. That means, let these waters be the cause of joy for everyone. Varyanam Ishana Varaniyanam Dhananam Ishari. So, these waters were considered to be the repository of sustenance and life. Now, here again you find more or less like the ancient sages said. Of course, just now Bobby was referring to Henry Thoreau. And now you can find, of course, unconsciously, when a transcendentalist moves from place to place, traveling in a forest, living close to the Walden Pond, or looking upon rivers and mountains as if they are his own sacred companions, you are actually catching the spirit of the ancient Vedic philosophy, where you are not solving the problem by finding a kind of short-term solution, but you are lifting your own consciousness. You start looking upon nature. You start looking upon these herbs, trees, plants with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. You can find this in another very interesting verse. For example, there is a verse in the Taittiriya Samhita where, surprisingly, roots, stems, leaves, branches, flowers and seeds of fruits are all considered to be sacred. And the Vedic sage is addressing the stem of a tree, the flowers of a tree, the leaves of a tree, the branches of a tree. So you find Oshadibhya Swaha, Mulebhya Swaha, Tulebhya Swaha, Kandebhya Swaha, Vatkebhya Swaha, Pushpebhya Swaha. It goes on Phalebhya, Vanaspadibhya, Mulebhya, etc. I offer the fruits, the stem, the leaves, the seeds of the fruits, the flowers, and the middle portion of the tree to this transcendental divinity that is omnipresent everywhere. So, the trees in a forest are considered to be the manifestations of the divine principle that is omnipresent and immanent on Mother Nature. And surprisingly, there is a well-known verse in the Rig Veda Samhita. It comes in another part of the Rig Veda. You know, it is actually called a hymn addressed to forest called Aranya Suktam. Here, a long hymn addressed to Aranya. Aranya means forests. So the forest itself is conceived to be a silent expression of Mother Nature. And in these verses you find the sages addressing the forest. So there are these tiny little creatures, insects, small animals making sound in the dead of night in the forest, and the mighty mountains at a distance, the tall trees around you, and then the branches of the trees spreading everywhere, and suddenly you find at a distance a woodcutter going in search of useful timber, and suddenly you find a wild animal crying at a distance, and all these constitute a very beautiful, charming picture. It is called Aranya Suktam. It comes in the 10th mandala of Rig Veda Samhita. In many of these suktas, there is one Rishi, so Deva Muni Rishi, a sage who is supposed to have written down when these ideas were revealed to him in his meditation. So, aranyani aso ye prevanasyasi kadhagramana prichasi nattvabhihi vivindati. So, Aranyadi Devade, the Sayanacharya was a great commentator. Now, I have to say a few things about the Vedas, Of course, I already mentioned maybe, but still a few more. Vedas are the most prominent and the most important and the most fundamental scriptures of Hinduism. They contain the most authentic statements of in all branches of Indian philosophy, especially theistic Indian philosophical systems, and they also contain, in a way, a graphic picture of the evolution of man's search for the transcendental, different concepts of God, from pantheism to pantheism, to polytheism, to monotheism, henotheism, and monism. So, it begins with looking upon nature itself as an expression of the divine present everywhere. And it ends with this concept of looking upon one eternal, omnipresent, immanent principle which transcends all names and forms. So this graphic evolution in the concept of absolute reality from pantheism to monism, ending with Advaita Vedanta, all this you find in Vedic literature. There are 4 Vedas, Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharva Veda, of which the most voluminous and most important and the most ancient Veda is Rig Veda, then Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharva Veda. And it was in the early decades of 18th century that European Indologists first came across Vedic literature, and there were innumerable translations of the Vedas. I am not going into further details. If you have got any more doubt, you are most welcome to ask questions during interaction. So the point is, in this Vedic literature you find this graphic evolution of our search for the transcendental. So in this you find something interesting. there are two stages in our spiritual evolution and in our relationship with nature. At the first stage, we establish a close affinity with nature. We look upon nature as part of our own spiritual family. We look upon the trees and mountains and waters as members of our own family, our own spiritual family. This is stage number one. At the next stage, you go beyond this stage. You go beyond nature. So from phenomenal to noumenal, be transcendental. This is an evolution. So that's why in one of the interesting dialogues in the Taittiriya Upanishad, a little boy comes to his father and he makes a request. Please teach me the highest truth. That's a request. Adhihi bhagavo brahmeti. It comes in the Taittiriya Upanishad. It is called, in the Upanishad literature, there are innumerable methods of meditation mentioned. You should remember, in the early Vedic times, there was no temple and there was no worship and there was no concept of image worship, which was later introduced to Vedic tradition, Hindu tradition, as a help for spiritual seekers to slowly evolve. During their spiritual evolution, they need a point for focusing their mind. For that, they need temples and images. But then eventually their goal was to realize the omnipresent, immanent, divine spirit within their own being. So you can find in this dialogue. So in this dialogue, the father and guru, his name is Varuna, and the son and the disciple is Bhrigu. So it is called, Varuni Vidya, which means a method of meditation expounded by the great sage Varuna to his son Bhrigu. That is what it means. There are innumerable such methods of meditation. It's called Vidyas or Upasanas in the Vedic literature, Upanishad literature. Samvarga Vidya, there are Bhuma Vidya, Dahara Vidya, and so on. That's not not within our scope right now. So, innumerable methods of meditation. In these meditations, you find there is this emphasis on connecting with nature, looking upon nature around us as our own spiritual family, and then evolving even beyond that, realizing the divine spirit within our own being. So, at the beginning of this dialogue, the son of the disciple comes to the father and makes a request. Bhriguvai varunihi varunam pitaram upasasara adhihi bhagavo brahmedi. This is how it begins. Means this Bhrigu comes to his father and makes a request. Father, please teach me the highest truth. Now, what does the father say? He doesn't ask him to go to a place of worship or read a book or pray to somebody. And that is very important. To fully understand the Vedic philosophy of life, we have to focus on this aspect. Varuna, the father, tells him, Annam pranam chakshusotram mano vachamiti Yatova imani bhudani jayende yena jatani jivanti ye prayendabhisam visandi tad vijijñasasva tad brahma iti. This is the first part of it. It goes like that, this paragraph begins. This is how it begins. So the father tells the son, look around and see there are many things around you. The trees are there, the matter, annam pranam chakshusrotram, matter, vital energy, then your senses of perception like eyes, ears and so on, and then your mind, your intellect. So, and also the trees and mountains and valleys and waters everywhere. Where do they come from? What is their true nature? And what sustains them? And in what direction they go, and finally how they get dissolved. Find out this. But how to find out this? You meditate. You go and sit under a tree, close your eyes and think, and you will find the answer within your own heart. Now, when the son did this at the first stage of his spiritual practice, he thought, well, what he sees in front of him is the absolute reality, the trees and mountains. And then he comes to his father. I have realized, annam brahme divya janad, etc. Matter is the essence, the most fundamental thing. Father told him, no, you are wrong, you should continue your meditation. Then the son discovered, if he thought, the vital energy. Father said, no, you are wrong, you continue your search. And the son found out the mind. Father said wrong. Then intellect. Finally, the son discovered that what he is searching outside is within his own inner being. Now, this is the evolution of consciousness. So the Vedic sages believe that the only solution for life's problems is to raise their own consciousness. Well, we can understand this in the present context of climate problem. Everyone knows there is a problem. Every child, even you can find there are some teenager activists who are leading big agitations, creating awareness. So everyone knows climate change and global warming are real problems. But then the solution they are trying to find out are based on short-term utilitarian principles. There is a problem because that problem creates problem for our health and comfort. So you have to solve the problem. But Vedic sages believe that is only a very temporary solution. The real solution is that we have to raise our own consciousness. We have to evolve a higher philosophy of life. And when we evolve this higher philosophy of life, then we will have a different idea of the problem. And for that, first of all, we should realize our affinity, our spiritual connectedness or interconnectedness, interrelatedness with nature. And that will help us to look at nature with compassion, looking at nature as part of our own family. And then, when this happens, when we practice these values, we slowly evolve some of these higher spiritual characteristics that will help us to raise our own consciousness. In the Vedic tradition, in the yoga tradition, it is called yoga or yamas and niyamas. Yamas and niyamas are not limited to the tradition of yoga. Yamas and niyamas are actually, they originate from Vedic literature. So, non-violence, truthfulness, freedom from greed, freedom from possessiveness, and a search for leading a pure life, then purity, contentment, and feeding our mind with higher ideas, and again is a kind of resignation to some higher spiritual ideal. It is called ahimsa, satya, asteya, brahmacharya, abhirigraha, shaucha, santosha, tapaswadhyaya, ishwar pranidhana. This is the only solution for obtaining freedom from greed, because the psychological root of the problem of climate change is human greed, our insatiable search for enjoyment and greed. That's why these Vedic sages they evolved a unique philosophy of life based on 4 values. If somebody asks the question, how could they look upon nature as part of their own spiritual family and not as something to be exploited and to be enjoyed? The real answer is they developed a philosophy of contentment based on the yamas and the yamas. And how did they apply this? They divided the whole scope of human existence into 4 stages or 4 values called Chaturvidha Purusharthas, means Dharma, Artha, Kama and Moksha. Dharma means a regulating principle based on ethics and morality. Artha means what we want to attain, obtain, desires, and the means for them. That is Artha. Kama means the human, the pursuit of happiness, which is natural, which is inevitable for every human being, is unavoidable. And the 4th principle is moksha. Moksha means a transcendental ideal, an ability to look upon everything as ephemeral, as transitory, and the search for something eternal. One may ask this question, this is some kind of a religion or religious philosophy. No. These 4 values are not necessarily religious values. They are the values which are most essential for our times, and especially in the context of the problems we are facing. Let us say the first principle, dharma. What it says is a pursuit of happiness, a pursuit of obtaining the tools for enjoyment and happiness should not be against the principle of the spiritual affinity with nature. So that is what dharma means. Dharma, the word dharma comes from a Sanskrit root dhr, means dharide, that sustains, that supports, that preserves. So our pursuit of material comforts, enjoyment and happiness should not make us deviate from the path of morality and ethics and our own affinity with nature or other living beings, fellow human beings and living beings. This is the first principle. Now, when we regulate our pursuit of material enjoyment, science and technology, and a great comfort and power and enjoyment that science and technology gives to modern man. We need science and technology. But at the same time, we need to know how to handle, how to make proper use of, how to manage what we derive, what we obtain from science and technology. For that, we need a wisdom. How do we get the wisdom? By self-restraint, by developing a philosophy of contentment. The philosophy of contentment will help us to go beyond this tyranny of human greed. Now, when we do this, what happens, we can have a happy life in this world, but at the same time, we won't be endangering our own life and the lives of our next generations by violating Mother Earth or the gifts of Mother Earth. So, this is the second principle, is artha and kama. The means for enjoyment, arthas, and kama means the desires, the natural desires of human beings. Our pursuit of fulfilling our desires should not take us away from the path of harmony and peace and our own spiritual affinity with nature around us. When we do this, we will be able to evolve a higher philosophy of life that is called moksha. Now, based on this principle of looking upon nature as our own spiritual fraternity, the Vedic sages could develop this philosophy of harmonious life. Means all activities, even the most ordinary utilitarian pursuit of happiness and enjoyment is understood, recognized as an inevitable part of human life for the normal human beings. But at the same time, we should not endanger the nature around us in our pursuit of happiness. So that's why you find, for example, this in this Aranya Sukta, it says, Vrisharavaya vadate yadu pavadi chichikakha agadibiravadhaya aranyani mahiyate. So here, the Vedic sages are singing about the sounds coming from the distant forests, different creatures and insects making noise. And then he says that there is an interesting comparison given. It says, Agadibi iva dhavayan, agadayo ghadigaha kandavinaha. That is actually, it's Sayana's commentary. Tabhir dhavayan nishadadi saptaswarani shodhayan gayaganiva. So the way the sages compare the sounds coming from different animals, different creatures, different insects in the silent, dense forest at midnight. They're comparing these sounds to the 7 notes of music. So, of course, these are all long poems. I don't have time to go through the entire Vedic text, but you can imagine the silence that you enjoy in a forest as a spiritual message. The sounds coming from wild animals, from insects and different creatures in the dense forest in a dark midnight, they are compared to 7 notes that you play in Veena, means a violin, roughly like violin is an ancient Indian musical instrument, now also very common, more or less maybe similar to violin. So this is like 7 notes of violin, it is said. Again, and in these forests, different animals, udagava ivadanti, utaveshme drishyate, utova aranyani sayam sakadiriva visarjati. And there are cows, lions, tigers, and different wild animals are wandering the forests. The cows come to the forest, feed themselves, and in the evening they go back to their own homes, the owners' homes. So you can find even the most ordinary phenomenon of nature, like forest, is conceived to be a manifestation of something transcendental. These are some of the interesting concepts that you find in the Vedic literature. So I mentioned this earlier, how the Vedic sages could evolve a philosophy of life, looking upon nature as a participant in our life, not as something to be exploited, to be consumed. Because if we do not evolve this higher philosophy of life, looking upon nature as not different from ourselves, and if you find a solution based on utilitarian short-term goals, we may not be able to solve the problem. As we all know, at the turn of the last century, 20th century, the total population of this planet was maybe 1.7 billion, and today it is approaching 8 billion. And it is said that in 2050 the population will again grow further, and it may be around 10 billion people inhabiting this planet Earth. And Earth doesn't have enough resources to feed and sustain all these people and different living beings. So the only way the only solution is to upgrade our consciousness. And this is possible only by reducing our aspirations, reducing our desires. And for that, the ancient Vedic sages evolved this philosophy of yoga. Yoga actually means connecting with the universal, going beyond our own individual. If a person becomes a yogi, remember yoga here doesn't mean physical exercise. Of course, obviously everyone knows it is not what we are talking about. It means a unique, integral, harmonious philosophy of life that helps us to live in affinity and close fraternity with nature. So when we can develop this, what happens is we can evolve a more positive and constructive response to the problem we are facing today, going beyond the crude short-term utilitarian solutions. That's why in ancient Vedic sages, in Vedic traditions, there was this ideal of evolution of human consciousness for every individual. When you are small, you study scriptures, or you are a student, you get ready, you prepare yourself to be a responsible member of the family, a responsible citizen of the country, a responsible member of society. It's called Brahmacharya asrama. It's called 4 ashramas. So, Brahmacharya asrama is the first stage. When a child is born, he will have to go through a number of sacraments, all based on the Vedic traditions. So every stage in his evolution is considered to be something spiritual and sacred. So the first few years will be spent on studying, training to become a useful and a responsible member of the family, whatever role that child is going to play in future. Maybe the husband or wife or brother or sister, father and mother, in whatever roles may be. And in ancient Vedic times, there was a convocation that used to be given to a child who is leaving the Vedic school after 12 years of education, a kind of convocation address. Again you find in the Turiya Upanishad, Veda Manucha Acharya Antevasena Manushasti Satyam Vada Dharmam Chara Satyana Pramadevim Dharmana Pramadevim, etc. Now, Madhadevo Bhava, Pitadevo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Aditi Devo Bhava, it goes on like that. So that means a kind of convocation address. A senior academic or maybe the teacher, the Acharya of the Vedic school, addressing a group of students who are now leaving the Vedic school, going back to their homes to marry and to become responsible members of society. The first instruction is you should respect and honor your parents, your teacher, and also the guest that comes to your home. And then there are instructions on performing these Panchayajnas or indebtedness. So we should respect those who are coming to our home, and we should respect our teacher, we should respect our tradition, and also we should also be compassionate to all living creatures around us, called Bhuta Yajna. We should have compassion to all living creatures around us. And that I mentioned this when I was discussing this Aranya Sukta, and also when I discussed this, Kandaya Swaha, Tulaya Swaha, Phalaya Swaha, means the fruit of a tree, the stem of a tree, or the leaf of a tree, all these are integral parts of nature. So they should not be destroyed. It was part of the instruction given to a student who was leaving the Vedic school after 12 years of Vedic education to be a responsible member of the family. This is the first stage. The second stage is natural, of course, Graceful means becoming a householder. The third stage is very important in our present context. It's called Prastasma. So, an householder, when he sees or when she sees the face of the grandson or granddaughter, should not again live in active involvement in family matters, but they should retire to a lonely place and should teach higher values to the next generation. It is called Vanaprasthasana. So, the ancient lawgiver who wrote well-known Manusmriti, which is an ancient text, more or less like a constitution. There are 18 such books on constitution on ancient Vedic way of life. Manusmriti is the most important, maybe the oldest, and the most frequently quoted. In fact, many of the statements were actually incorporated into Hindu code, Hindu law in 19th century. Anyway, there's a different subject. So he says, Grihastasya yada pasye vali palidam atmanaha apatyasya apatyam tada aranyam samasya. It's a famous verse. What it means is, when an householder living a responsible life in his home, and when he is sure that his family tree will continue, his family tradition will be, lineage will continue intact, then he should leave his home or she should leave her home and then stay in a secluded place in contemplation and meditation. And it is said, there also the forest is mentioned. Why forest is important? I do not know. But one important reason is forest always has got a great attraction and great relevance in higher pursuit. Even Thoreau himself was moving from one forest to another forest. In fact, all the time he was moving around, in fact, through these thick forest, trees and mountains and ponds. So, that was how these values were preserved. And the fourth stage is, of course, the stage of transcendental value. So, you can find these four stages in the evolution of an individual. A student, then a householder, then a contemplative, and then a higher seeker of truth. And again, our pursuit of material goals are okay, but it should not be in violation of the fundamental sustaining principle of dharma. And the dharma itself, as I mentioned, it is from the Sanskrit root dhr. Dhr means dharya, it means supports, sustains, preserves, keeps everything intact, prevents from getting destroyed. So, our pursuit of happiness should not be in violation of the interest of society as a whole. And this is possible only if you bring an element of sacredness and sanctity in our interaction, even in the matter of our responding to the problem of climate change. Any attempt to bring about a change in the climate problem, responding to the climate change problem, of course, elected governments can always play very important constructive role, no doubt about it. But it can be sustained only if there is an evolution of human consciousness. We have to evolve a philosophy of life which is based on the spiritual harmony and interrelatedness of the entire natural phenomena. Nature is not there for us to exploit and enjoy. Nature is our friend. Nature is a member of our own family. If we violate nature, we cannot hope to live a happy life in this world. This is a fundamental principle. Now, very often, we are very late in realizing this truth. As I mentioned earlier, the uniqueness of the challenge of climate change is the problem is us, we are the problem. And therefore the solution also should begin in our own hearts. And this is possible only by evolving a higher, constructive and creative way of life, a philosophy of life, which recognizes the fact that we will not be able to live a happy life if we violate nature. If we pollute air and water, it not only endangers our own life and the lives of the coming generations, but also essentially it is a morally and ethically wrong thing to do. So this is an important thing. I mentioned this yesterday, the spiritual unity and oneness of creation and existence. We cannot live in isolation. There is a statement in the Mandukya Karika, one of the Vedic text it is called. So Siddhanta Vyavasthasu Dvaitino Nischidadridam Parasparam Viruddhyande Tairayanna Viruddhide. It actually talks about the idea of interrelatedness, unity and oneness of existence. We cannot do harm to ourselves because we will be suffering the pain. Similarly, when we violate the balance of nature, when we disturb the rhythm of life in nature, we will be actually disturbing ourselves. We can't disturb nature without eventually disturbing, without doing harm to ourselves. So these are some of the important things. But again, this solution is possible only if we raise our own consciousness. And this is not possible without developing the yamas and niyamas. The yamas and niyamas are designed to develop a feeling of contentment and essential satisfaction within our hearts. And when we develop this contentment, then we will get complete freedom from greed. And greed is the most toxic, most poisonous disease of modern times, especially in industrialized societies. Greed. Nobody is going to be happy even if he becomes a trillionaire. If he has trillions of dollars, still nobody is going to be happy. He may be still working hard to amass a few more millions. That means greed has no end. That's what Buddha also said, desire, trishna, is the root of all problems. And a philosophy of contentment based on yoga is the only real and permanent answer to this toxic, poisoning disease of desire and greed, which is the root of the problem of climate change. And I believe there will be an interesting exchange of views during the question and answers. You are most welcome to participate. This is an open platform. Thank you. Namaskar.
Well, thank you very much. Namaskar. Thank you very much, Maharaj.
Yeah, thank you.
It's a magnificent address. I can't think of the possibility of anything more inspiring and practical than that. I am scanning the horizon for hands and questions and chat questions and Facebook and YouTube questions. But in the meantime, since I've seen none yet, I'm going to ask you about this holistic view of how we're not really going to make a dent in this human-caused problem if we're very segmented. If we're segmented both socially and spiritually, that somehow it's a world problem that requires a higher consciousness, but also an integration of that consciousness. Swamiji wrote in one of his essays. I'm speaking of Swami Vivekananda, the founder of this society.
Yeah.
He wrote that nature that nature's evolution is the soul's struggle to manifest itself. Earlier in that essay, he spoke about the misunderstanding of nature as something merely perceived as a phenomenon, that somehow mind and spirit were left out of our appreciation of nature. So that actually seems to dovetail with what you were saying in the address.
Yeah, when we use the word nature in the context of climate change, we are actually, in normal conversations, we are actually talking about external, phenomenal nature. So, we polluting the air or gas emissions or carbon footprints. We are actually talking about the external nature. In this context, our own essential nature. So I have to make this clear. I mentioned this during the talking. Briefly, I mentioned the Vedic sages. They talk about nature. For example, the forest hymn. Then there is a hymn on agriculture, hymn on waters, Apasuktam, and so on. In all these contexts, nature is mentioned, the external nature. So, when we look upon the nature around us, the trees and mountains and valleys, as part of our own spiritual family, that's a road to realize our own divine nature within ourselves. That's why in that dialogue, the little boy who asked his father, please teach me the supreme spiritual truth. At the beginning of the verse, the father tells, see, look around, these beautiful trees, these mountains, these valleys, where do they come from? Who is responsible for these mountains standing in front of you, these trees in front of you, the clouds above? Who is responsible for it? Where do they come from? Who sustains them? And what is going to happen to them later? The origin, the existence, and the dissolution. What is that? And then the boy meditates. When he meditates, actually, he is meditating on the beauty of the tree, of the clouds and mountains. And that meditation slowly takes him beyond the mountains and trees. And eventually he realizes his own divine nature within, his own Atman. So that's why there are 108 meditative practices mentioned in the Upanishadic literature. And it is called Vidya. Vidya means Upasana, means a method of meditation. In each of these meditations, one symbol from nature is taken. Dahara means sky. Bhuma means the vast expanse. So, some metaphor, some analogy, some symbol is taken from external nature, and the spiritual seeker is asked to meditate on the beauty, the grandeur of this. And that meditation actually takes him beyond the tree on which he is meditating, beyond the clouds on which he is meditating, and eventually he realizes the supreme divine reality within himself. That's why, from phenomenal to transcendental, you find this evolution. So Swamiji is talking about this, the transcendental aspect of nature in this sentence that you quoted. Thank you for that question. Thank you.
Thank you, Swamiji. I see Rich's hand up, and I also see Mel. Rich's hand up was there first, and Mel, you're second.
Yeah.
Rich, can you unmute yourself, please, and ask your question?
Sure. Thank you. Pranams, Maharaj.
Yeah, yeah.
Hello, everyone. I apologize. My connection was in and out, so if you covered this, please disregard. But the thing that struck me as you were talking, I kept going to certain parables from the Upanishads. So I started thinking about Satyakama.
Yeah.
And how Satyakama, he's told to go out into nature and various animals come to him and they say it is this, And then I was thinking, well, I want to ask a question about that, but then I started thinking about Shvetaketu and how he explains the reality through rivers and bees and oceans and trees and seeds and all these things, and then Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, this earth is honey to all beings and all beings honey to this. And it just seems like every time I had an idea, another one would appear, Taittiriya Upanishad, how you pronounce things, you have to understand it within concept of nature. How important all these creation stories are. And so I think what I want to ask is just, is it possible to understand Upanishads without understanding this deep connection to nature and our role in it? Is there any way to get, that we see it all in terms of this fragmentation that we are trying to get over. The sages who created these don't have this problem, so I'll let you speak on that. I think I've said enough.
Thank you. In fact, I can answer this question by narrating this the Satyakama Jabala story. And it's a very interesting, very telling exposition, A guru tells his disciple, you will ask him, and he gives, the guru gives the disciple Gautama, he gives the disciple Satyakama, you take these 400 cows, and when they reach 1,000 number, you return. So the disciple is expected to take these 400 old, not old, but they are very, very famished cows, not healthy. They didn't get enough grass to eat for years. They're famished, weak. 400 cows are being taken to the forest by a disciple, and the teacher tells him when they reach 1,000 number, you return. No, actually the teacher is expected to give him an exposition of Brahman, God or Supreme Reality. Instead of that, you take these cows and go and feed them and look after them and return. Not a very not a very pleasant situation. But the disciple accepts this advice with all sanctity and sacredness. He takes these 400 weak, famished cows to the forest, where he bathes them well, feeds them well, looks after them well, so with all care and attention. And the reverence, a sense of sacredness and sanctity and sincerity with which the disciple takes care of these cows, that causes an evolution of his own mind consciousness. So this is something very interesting. So the disciple now, he plunges into his action, taking care of the cows. He bathes them, feeds them, takes full care of these cows. As I mentioned, but he does it with a great sense of sanctity and sacredness, not mechanically. If he did mechanically, nothing will happen to him. The cows will become very healthy, but nothing will happen to his mind. But the sanctity and sacredness, the sincerity, with the pure intention with which the disciple does his duty, that brings about a change in his consciousness. So after some time, one bull comes to him, teaches him something. From the bull he hears some sound. One day he was doing his fire ceremony. The fire came and spoke something to him, a great philosophy. Also one day, one bird, Madgu bird, and sometimes a swan. So all these different creatures and animals, he felt, he thought, he imagined they were speaking to him, they were expounding some higher philosophy to him. What was he hearing? He is listening to philosophy coming from his own mind. His own mind is teaching him. His own consciousness is evolving, going higher and higher. And as his own consciousness slowly evolves, all doubts are gone, slowly his mind becomes clear. And his mind becomes his own teacher. His mind becomes his own teacher. Because his mind evolves, the consciousness evolves slowly. So all doubts are gone, and this is interpreted in the language of the Vedic sage. So one swan came and taught him, bull came and taught him, a Madgu bird came and taught him, the fire came and taught him. Actually, none of them ever came and taught him. He felt. One day he must have been washing the bull with all attention because his teacher had told him. So suddenly some doubts there is a lingering doubt in his mind. All doubts gone. So he thought the bull was teaching him. Again there must have been swans and he was taking care of them. So with all sincerity and sacredness. So his mind becomes pure and pure because of the sincerity and sanctity with which he was doing. So what happens, this happens to all of us. Whenever we do our normal duties and responsibilities with a sense of sanctity and sacredness, what happens, our mind also slowly evolves. It becomes, it attains a kind of serenity, sanctity, and awareness. This happens. This we can find. That's in the Vedic tradition. Suppose you are living in a forest. Richard is living in a kind of a forest, no Lima, Look at those trees and mountains. You take care of anyone who takes care of those things. You know what happens? You become a different person. That's what happened to Thoreau. Thoreau was not studying in a university. He was moving, in the Walden you find, he says, I emptied my liquid pork into the Walden waters. He talks about it. He was actually eating liquid pork, nothing very pleasant to eat. But then he was walking from place to place. He was cursing the intrusion of railroad. He didn't like it. And he talks about, there was small military platoons exercising. Bobby may remember those words in Thoreau. And he didn't like it. He didn't like the intrusion of the railroad into the forests. He said it's an intrusion, it's an invasion of the sanctity of the forest. So he was looking at the trees with the awe, grandeur, beauty and charm and a kind of divine association. When he looked at these trees and Walden waters and the clouds, something happened to Thoreau. He became a sage. This is what happens. The way Satyagama heard or imagined that he heard sounds coming from the bull or the swan or the fire, Thoreau goes on writing all this in the Walden, Actually, he talks about civil disobedience, he talks about many great things, which even Gandhi himself was a great admirer of Henry Thoreau. So you can find in civil disobedience, there's a whole chapter on that. So the point is, when you live in close proximity with nature, instead of becoming crazy and greedy, you start enjoying a kind of serenity, contentment within. In fact, that's what I think our environmental enthusiasts have to learn. In my opinion, instead of holding the huge conferences where the mighty, powerful political leaders come and give some eloquent lectures and preaching to third world countries, sub-Saharan countries, you should stop using coal. We have been using for 70 years. We have reached a high level of industrial development. No, you should stop using that. Instead of that, they should, I think, maybe along with that, not instead of that, but along with that, they should also try to evolve a higher philosophy of life that will naturally help us to live in close proximity with nature and help us to look at nature not as an alien but as our own family member. That's what is needed. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for that response. Thanks for your patience, Mel. Can you unmute yourself, please, and ask the question?
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, Swamiji.
Yeah, thank you.
You said that greed is the cause of climate change.
Yeah.
And at the recent conference of world leaders who tried to address this issue of climate change, at the very end of it, the host of that meeting broke down and cried because he said that the efforts that we have made to curtail climate change are not enough. Now, this problem the problem was greed. You know, the leaders of these countries could not give up the greed that would lead to the growth that they felt their country needed. My question is, where does this greed come from? It seems to me that it would come from the mistaken idea that consciousness is produced by the brain, even though there's no evidence for this.
Yeah.
If consciousness is produced by the brain, then death is the end, and we will try to get as much as we can before we die. So even though there's no evidence that consciousness is produced by the brain, still there's this movement of willful ignorance against it that is almost impossible to deal with. How do you deal with this kind of willful ignorance?
Yeah, and that's true. So, first of all, they cannot think of anything beyond the empirical, I think, beyond the worldly. And that's why when the G7 leaders, when they talk about the need to reduce the carbon footprint or gas emissions, and then some of the countries, especially the backward countries, backward nations, they retort by saying, China and India, they are trying their best, but even these two countries which are now developing quite fast, even they are not in full agreement with some of the views, but of course they are mostly agreeing. But there are other countries in the African continent, except South Africa perhaps, they cannot all of a sudden stop using coal because they cannot afford to use an alternate fuel because they are not economically or industrially advanced enough. So the point is, there is always some kind of a disagreement. It's natural. It's all because they limit their views and the thinking to the empirical level. I think that's something important, the empirical level. And I don't think there can be a real solution to the problem of greed at the empirical level, because there will be always disagreement. But if they can talk about something higher than the empirical, perhaps there will be more agreement, I believe. But there again, they immediately believe, if you talk about consciousness, suddenly they may start thinking consciousness which is not the product of brain. If you argue that consciousness is not the product of brain, then they will start arguing it's kind of a religion. It is not religion. Well, religious texts and spiritual scriptures may talk about consciousness, but it is not an almighty, all-wise, omniscient God sitting above the clouds telling us what we should do. It is the need, it's all about the need to raise our own understanding, our own interpretation of existence and life. That's what consciousness is all about. When we raise our consciousness, we are actually evolving a new way of interpreting the meaning of life, the meaning of existence. That is what is needed. So, I don't think that so long as they confine and limit their thinking to the empirical level, it is possible to get rid of greed. That's an important thing. So they have to go beyond empirical, beyond the level of worldly profits, industrial profits. There are other backward countries who will disagree. We cannot afford, so we'll continue using coal. You have no argument against it. But if you talk about the need to evolve a higher philosophy of life, which is important and necessary for the survival of humanity, there will be more people coming forward to agree and create a kind of consensus about it. Okay.
Thank you, Swamiji. I hear you describing a path beyond the limited notion of winners and losers, who's right, who's wrong, that kind of in the opinion leadership and governing authorities in the world. It sounds as though there's a self-defeating competition going on. So that's really a wonderful broadening view. Ramesh, I see a hand up, but Ramesh posted in chat first. Ramesh, can you unmute yourself and ask the question, please?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Maharaj. This was a very, very appropriate and very practical advice to everyone about how we should behave ourselves or control our behavior and work with the nature. So that was a very inspirational talk, and it was really very good for everyone. My question is, that all of these things boils down to, like a lot of these stories, the Satyakama stories and all this that we hear. In fact, those same kind of concept apply to everything that we do in our everyday life, even today's work. Like, where we're working, how do we realize that we are not doing something right, or we should do something right, and it can uplift, and we can learn from that, and we can become our own teacher. So most of the time I see that, the desires and feelings and all this, there's a lot more desire to teach other people than learning ourselves and how to control our behavior in everyday life. If everybody does their part properly, then there should not be a problem. Yeah. But we always expect somebody else to take care of the problem, and we never consider that we are the problem. So that attitude, how do you emphasize on a daily basis to improve and really focus on that aspect?
Yeah, all that we can do is to emphasize the need to evolve a higher kind of awareness, higher consciousness that goes beyond the material or the empirical. That's all we can do. No, you can find anyone who does some good work with all sincerity, with all honesty, with some kind of sacredness and sanctity. It has a positive effect on his mind. His mind also evolves. This is a practical thing. It has nothing to do with any religion or any faith or doctrine. So that can be, that idea should be made known to larger number of people. That's the only way we can do. Yeah. As you know, in this, I was talking about these climate change conferences. There is a lot of discussion and a lot of calling upon, urging on other nations to follow. But nations who are so backward, they cannot afford to dispense with coal consumption. What will they do for sustaining their own, the present level of standard of life? They have to depend upon coal. There is no other way for many countries. So when these economically advanced G7 countries preach this high philosophy to backward countries, which they cannot afford to practice, it more or less boils down to the same thing. But then, if we can think of raising our level of awareness of this problem, going beyond the utilitarian, short-term benefits, then perhaps more people will join, more people will agree with the need to do our best to reduce the problems that cause climate change and catastrophes in the next 10-15 years, which are inevitable to come if we don't reverse the present level of gas emissions and violation of nature, violation of earth.
I think, the main thing that I was thinking that the excessive desires people have, and that becomes a root cause for a lot of these problems. So if we follow these 4 stages that you mentioned and really truly carry out our own part in those faithfully and earnestly and all that, then at least we can contribute ourselves to the society in a better way.
And the art of graceful retirement, they mean how to gracefully retire from active life and spend the last few years in a higher contemplation. That is called Vanaprastha. Now I think it has got a great message. But then this is the 4 stages, the student, the householder, then the hermit, and then the mendicant. 4 stages. And again, more important that perhaps, the idea that dharma, the sustaining principle, the regulating principle, should guide our pursuit of happiness and enjoyment and comforts. That's something. We have to, all people have to pursue the path of happiness and enjoyment. And for that they need many things, including natural resources. But then there should be a restraining principle, a restraining element, dharma. I think that's at the back of many of these higher ideas in the Vedic principle. You can see there are many other verses. I can just quote from something, To give an example, in the Yajurveda Samhita, this statement. So the Vedic sage is he's addressing those who waste their lifetime in gambling. So better stop doing that and take to agriculture. So krishyetva kshemayatva rithetva poshayatva is the Yajurveda Samhita, it comes. So a gambler is urged to stop doing that and instead take to doing agriculture, which will be kshema, which will be benefit and prosperity of others. So you can find many such interesting statements here. So creative pursuit of activities is often urged as one way of practicing restraint, contentment in our life.
Just the last thing that I will mention, Maharaj, one more thing here.
Yeah, please.
I mean, in a simple way, the way that I understand this is not to go on extreme on anything. And be mindful of not to waste anything. And simply fulfill your basic needs in a simple way. And if that life is regulated that way, then a lot of the problems could go away.
That's true.
I mean, even with the nature, that if we don't go excessive, like we always used to say, Varuna is the god of water. So always, do the puja every day of Varuna, sun, and God, and all this every day. So that's respecting nature and respecting our own inner spirit also that way.
True. There are innumerable deities, and many of the natural forces are deified in Vedic mantras. So sometimes, those of you who are interested, there are two ways of studying this Vedic literature. For Western students, I would always recommend them, those who are not familiar with Sanskrit, they can read Vedic Reader by MacDonald, who is a prominent British Indologist. Balduson's interpretation of the 60 Upanishads into German, translated in English, and also Max Muller. Max Muller is an interesting example. Max Muller was actually commissioned to publish and translate the Vedas, thinking that if he makes Vedas known to people, people will lose faith in Vedic philosophy. But when he started studying the Vedas, he became a lifelong devotee of Vedic culture, Vedic civilization. With the result that when Vivekananda met him in Oxford in 19th century, during his European travels, he met Max Muller, and Swami Vivekananda asked him, "Have you visited India?" He said, "No, if I visit India, you may have to bury me there, but he won't be able to come back from India." Now this man, who was commissioned to do some mischief against Vedic culture, when he started studying it, he became a lifelong devotee, a fan of Vedic culture. So Vivekananda compares Max Muller and his wife to a Vedic sage and his wife, Vasishtha and Arundhati. Very interesting episode you find in Swami Vivekananda's European travels. So, what I mean to say, there is something so universal in the Vedic literature. You read it, you may be born to any tradition, any culture, any language, you may be an atheist, but you will be connecting with something that is irresistible. You find Vedas are talking about yourself. When Vedas expound some higher idea, you think it's your own story. So, that is the universal application of Vedic philosophy and Vedic way of life. It is all about the natural human pursuit of higher values, higher evolution. No matter whether you are a believer or non-believer. That is a uniqueness. That's why in many of these verses, you don't find any urging to go and pray to a particular deity. What it's talking about, even the Varuna or Vanadevata, in the Aranya Sukta, forest is addressed as Vanadevata, means the forest goddess. That's what it means. So, it's not that the forest is considered to be a goddess, but it means there is a divinity in the grandeur and beauty of the mighty trees and shrubs that you find in a forest. It is not just, a tree is not standing in front of you for you to cut, reduce timber, make a furniture and sell and make money and enjoy. No. There is a higher meaning and purpose and relevance behind the tree, behind the forest. So also the sunlight, the moon and so on. So entire Vedic literature is actually, it contains a unique, harmonious, integral way of life.
And that's what, like in the scriptural studies, that's what we used to do when we were much younger and all this, always say, emphasize that the forest and all these things, it provides a peacefulness, the peacefulness that it creates to your own mind, and that's how you relate to the higher power at that point by being there, because that peacefulness always helps you, and that's why you need to preserve that atmosphere and all this. So, but anyway, so this literature and the Vedic principles and all this, if you follow that every day, that's the main aspect for everyone to do, I suppose. But thank you for explaining what I said.
Thank you.
Maharaj, I know that that the last questioner exemplifies in many ways the sense of responsibility both in home and private life, and also in the social and organizational and business life. As a matter of consistency, he's been very admirable in that regard. So I know that when he speaks of doing one's part, he means without hypocrisy and with great consistency in life. We have a question on YouTube, but Kathleen is next. And Kathleen, thank you very much for your patience in standing by.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you both. Thank you so much, Maharaj.
Thank you.
Swamiji.
Thank you.
You know, the question of greed and desire and the leaders of all the nations, this particular talk today has been so helpful to me and so healing. The idea of the story of the man being sent out to take care of 400 cows is a really good example for me of when I become quiet and start investigating within myself, I find greed, and my particular greed happens to be a greed for knowledge. And when you realize that, and it's connected with desire, and it surely may have a good goal, but it can interfere with the whole picture. It's as if the man who takes the cows into the woods says to herself, I have to get this into 1,000. And you concentrate on 400, 450, 460. And if things go wrong, you become discouraged. And all of a sudden, you're not focusing on the beauty of these cows and the relationship and the depth and the insight that those moments give you. And also, in the meantime, it's assumed that this person is meditating and their mind is becoming still. And in the story, it's beautiful because the answers come eventually of themselves. So here we are in the 21st century, and it's as if we're being told, okay, go into the forest with your 400 cows and come back with 1,000, and the earth is crumbling and being destroyed, and you only have so much time. So then there's this added factor of the desire, coming into terms with one's desire, but also fear and despair. And so one has to, in this journey that I'm so grateful for you and the sages and everyone and nature and the world, to show that there is a way, and it is real, and it is true. And there's also, in this whole thing, there's a certain amount of faith that's needed, that this will come to be. And what is. And I do my part. That's my individual responsibility. And as a collective, it's kind of up to Mother Earth and God to orchestrate that. I'm not so good at orchestrating those things, and I admit it. So it's like, it's a beautiful way of understanding where greed comes from. And then the focus is taken off the leaders and coming to understand our own battles and our own beauties too. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Very encouraging words. Thank you so much.
Very much so. And I have to address the bear in the room, and that's the YouTube question. And it has to do with system change. The question, let's just say, it's not without its power. I believe, this is the questioner, the real source of the problem is global capitalism creating commodification of Mother Earth in a for-profit model rather than valuing sustainability and quality of life and love. And I would point out that things are partially evolving because there are conceptions of altering the bottom line and adjusting it to triple bottom line, B corporations, for this public benefit, and evaluations of the ethics of unbridled, crass, winner-take-all capitalism.
Yeah.
So, there is a political element to that because, again, it focuses on, the structure of the model of winners and losers, and we've spent a lot of time transcending that as the entirety of the problem. After all, another quote from Thoreau is that the universe is wider than our views of it. Mm-hmm. So perhaps the universe is wider than our views of capitalism also, but it is still a question about how we together can address the problems that sometimes feel out of our control, and that is the system at large.
Yeah, thank you. I don't know where to draw the line right now, because I think we are past that stage where we could actually draw a line. This is capitalism, this is social. I think that those demarcations are no more relevant. They are no more existing, actually, really speaking, because there is some kind of a global economic system which is neither this nor that, which is perhaps it would be better if there is a harmonious blending of all the positive aspects. That'd be wonderful, plus this awareness of the sanctity of nature. So I don't think any of the non-capitalist economies are any better than the capitalist countries in preserving nature. I don't think so. So you cannot really draw a line anywhere, So
I agree. I think that we're all kind of not carving slices of a pie. We are all a pie. The spiritual view is that we are the system. Also that our investment in each other is a soul investment and a heart investment. That's not separate from. So if we have to alter some of our systemic thinking, some of the patterns, perhaps we zoom out to look at the system of systems, which is what we've been trying to do today.
We cannot.
I'm sorry.
We cannot draw any lines of demarcation in the present context. Please continue.
Well, we're speaking, universally as universalists and non-dualists. That's the power that we've arrived at today. And I see a chat comment. Ramesh would like a follow-up.
I just wanted to make one comment here in relation to the last question that was raised with this. I mean, a lot of times, we come up with these questions that there are so many things wrong in the global situation of the structure or the setup. Now, how much control do we have to influence, to make changes on those things and all this? And if we keep on thinking at that level without having any real power or control, then we are not doing any favor to anybody.
True.
Instead, if we do what we can do, if we can promote the message that capitalism is not good and lead a simple life and all this, what all this like Vedanta philosophy being taught to everyone and all this, and if we spread that message as much as we can at our end or by ourselves, then we are doing our part. But if we try to change the world, it can never happen to begin with.
True. That is true.
Gandhiji comes to mind, Ramesh. The way that the power of the philosophy was more than the questions of the economy could vanquish. The power of the heart and the understanding of the ancient wisdom brought down the most powerful imperial powers of that time. So perhaps we can look at the historical antecedents and see that don't necessarily have any better tools than that, and those tools are everything.
Yeah.
So I think, there was one senior Swami had mentioned one time, that he got a phone call from somebody and asking Swamiji that I like to change the world and how can I do that? Time is running out and I have to do that part. And Swamiji thought about that for a moment and responded to him that why don't you change yourself so there'll be at least one less fool in the world. That was Swamiji's response.
Yeah.
I have a proposal, and that is that I know there are many spiritual summits. Even the Vatican is in on the question, but we have an opportunity here in Northern California we already invite people, one and all, for retreats during better times, during non-COVID times, to get back to nature in Olima, and that is a tremendous resource, and I think we're on the right track with that, of course. But spreading the word to opinion leaders and business leaders to participate in that way, which we already do, but I think that could have more social impact. So there's an opportunity there, I think, to have positive reach.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Namaskar. I will conclude now with a short invocation. Om Dyo Shantiranthariksham Shanti Prithvi Shantirapa Shantiroshadhaya Shantihi Vanaspataya Shantir Vishve Deva Shantir Brahma Shanti Sarvam Shanti Shantireva Shantihi Sama Shantiredhi Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.